Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast with me, Janet Hitchin, and Mike Klein. Navigating Disruption is a podcast that aims to help communication professionals, leaders, and organisations navigate the disruption that lies ahead. This episode, we speak with Shan Chatoo. Shan describes herself as a communications warrior, which brings with it images of strength, hard work, battles won and lost, and in the current context, frankly, Gladiator 2 and Paul Mescal. She explains this as helping teams make meaningful connections with their people, equipping them with the tools and coaching needed to provide clarity and take purpose-driven action. She does this by analysing the data, listening hard, speaking truth to power, advising on the right course of action, even if it's not what others want to hear, strong collaboration and partnership, and a strong coaching streak. She advocates for resilience and empowerment, combining her communication expertise with her personal passion for strength training to inspire others. Her career has involved overcoming significant challenges, including workplace bullying, which she has used as a foundation to develop a no-nonsense, empowering outlook in both her professional and personal life. Strength, empowerment, and being match fit for the disruption game are some of the topics we can't wait to dig into. She's currently Global IC Director at S3, I think I'm pronouncing that right,
Yeah, you are.
the STEM Talent Specialists. Welcome to the podcast, Shan.
Yay. Thank you for having me.
Blush, 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 blush. So we're going to get straight stuck in. And obviously I have things on my phone, which is why I'm looking down here if anybody's wondering. So you're a comms professional by day,
Yes,
or by week, and a personal trainer by weekend.
that's right. Yeah.
And you've told me that you do that Saturdays and Sunday mornings, which I'm like, blows my mind.
Yeah.
How does the strength and resilience you have learned from being a personal trainer help you in your day-to-day?
I think if we wind back a bit, let's wind back 10 years. So
Yeah.
10 years ago, I was not this Shan
Okay.
at all. Okay. I was a Shan who said yes to everything. I was the Shan who, when having a bad day, would reach for a bottle, or I would go into the snack drawer and pretty much eat it all. And that Shan ended up with diabetes. And that Shan ended up on anxiety tablets. And that Shan really couldn't cope.
Yeah.
And I met someone who, outside comms, I met a young man. We were in the gym and he started talking to me because I was there and he was helping me. And we started talking and he said, "Why aren't you lifting weights?" And it was a really interesting question because I thought, my God, I've never thought about it. Women don't think, or did not think 10 years ago, of walking into a gym and picking up weights. I started picking up weights. That changed my outlook on everything. And I tell you why. You get stronger. You get physically stronger. And when you're physically stronger, believe it or not, your confidence, it shifts. It shifts so far. I have clients. Most of my clients are women. I do have a few male clients, but most of them are female. They're all around the same age as me. So, late 30s to mid 50s. I have one client that's actually 72 as well. And
She sounds like an amazing rock star, by the way.
She is a rock star. That woman is a rock star. But the thing they all have in common, life has taken a beating.
Yeah.
And they want to build a level of resilience. So I suppose the thing and that relationship between comms and strength training is, for me, quite simple. It's giving me an outlet. It's given me the place where I can build my physical strength, have space to really think about and make time for my brain to calculate all those conversations that you have on a day-to-day basis, bring clarity to what I do every day. And then it gives me that personal confidence to just get the shit done.
So you said it's about confidence. We
Yeah.
hear a lot from communication professionals that they don't have the confidence to have difficult conversations. They don't have, is it confidence? Is it courage? So how could you channel some of what you've learned here? What would you recommend to others? Is it going to the gym and lift a weight, or is it something else?
It's about having the audacity. Audacity is a really negative word,
Oh, I think it's
but
quite a good word. I quite like it.
I
but
think
it
it's
is
above
about
average.
it is about having the audacity to challenge yourself first and
Yeah.
foremost. Comms people, successful comms people that I have seen, that I've worked with, I had the pleasure of working with,
Mm,
are not wallflowers. They're not. And it's really interesting. They may be quaking inside, really
mm,
quaking. And my God, I quake every day, believe
mm,
me. But when you have the audacity to speak up, and you can start small, and that's where I started. I started small.
mm.
I actually physically used to raise my hand. I don't do that anymore. I just say it.
Yeah.
But when you have that audacity to start putting your hand up, that's when you start to feel a little bit more confident. But you
Mm,
do need to do some things before you put your hand up. You do need to make sure that you have analyzed the data. Never walk into a room without really preparing for a meeting. Prepare for that conversation. Who are you speaking to? What's their buttons? How are you going to press them? What do you need to avoid? What's going on in their world? Do your stakeholder engagement and your management
yeah.
like you've never done anything before. Understand the topic you're about to go and discuss. What data could you bring to the table? What is the point you need to get across, and how are you going to prove that? Arm yourself with the information you need, then put up your hand. That is the most important thing, I think.
How does that show up for a communication person whose main focus at the moment is making sure that their execs are getting the gluten-free meal at the holiday party? How do you take somebody across that gap?
It's an interesting one. So, it's only really recently, I would say the last 3 years, that I've had the guts to be that person. And getting across that gap was a huge, huge leap, if I can use the words in that way. It was a huge leap for me. And I did build those relationships, solid relationships with those execs before I made that leap. I did make sure that if they were in the office at 7 a.m., and I know some people can't do this because everyone's got different lifestyles, but I made
Mm,
sure I was there. I made sure I was, when they were making a coffee, I was in the room. I was asking them lots of things. I understood exactly what it was that was going to get them on side. And then I armed myself with the data every single time, regardless of what the topic of conversation was going to be, whether it was, the working from home piece versus coming into the office every day, whether it was how are we going to handle a data crisis moving forwards, whatever the conversation was, I made sure that I had that information, whether it was casual information gathered from focus groups or round a coffee table with a bunch of employees that perhaps they're not really listening to right now because they haven't got the time,
mm.
or if it was hard data gathered from a range of metrics that you can find in every organization if you look hard enough.
Have you had a problem getting people in the organization to give you the data that you were asking for?
Yeah, every day. Every day. It's like, why should we share that with you? What are you going to do with it? I've come across people who won't share information because they're scared to, because it shows
Mm,
something that perhaps they don't want us to know, or it would shape an exec's viewpoint in a different way. We have to remember, and I think this is really important for comms people to remember, and it's a little bit out there, but it is true. We have to remember that execs do not have their finger on the pulse. It's impossible. But what they do have are people shaping their opinions.
mm,
And sometimes that data can actually fly in the face of some of those opinions or that shaping that's being done. And we need to be brave enough to get that data. However, you need to get that data, get that data. Believe I've done some funny things in my time to get data. Um, but then to use that data to shape that conversation in the room with the right people. Because I tell you one thing, your exec will only know half the story most of the time.
Want to explore the burning questions your C suite and clients are asking? Then you should consider the next Navigating Disruption Mastermind. Janet and I will challenge and coach you in an 8 session program. You'll join other Navigating Disruption listeners and other senior comms pros. For more information, follow the Navigating Disruption page on LinkedIn.
Do you have a strategy or a prevailing approach, particularly when you go into a new organization, to building those relationships with senior leaders? Walk us through, your first 3 months of doing that.
Well, I've just finished my first 3 months at S3.
Well, it's perfect timing.
So
It
just
is
tell us what
perfect
you've just done
timing.
then. That's fine.
I can tell you what I've just done. So I make sure they know who I am. Okay, within the first day, I'm there. I'm in their face. I'm sending emails. I'm arranging with. I speak with their PAs. I make friends with their EAs. I think that's very, very important. I then start to have a look at the org structure. Who is influencing them? Who's on their team? Who else do I need to get to know? Before I get to that place where I'm going to sit in a room with them, I want to know who else is sitting at their tables. And I do that before I walk into the room. I make sure I've had at least an introduction to those people so that when they do go and speak to their people or their EA or their PA, who is this person? Have you met them? The answer is yes, I have. And suddenly that starts to shift the conversation because you've spoken to someone that they trust, someone perhaps who's been there for a lot longer time than you. So I did that initially at S3. Then I look for opportunities. Where can I add value immediately? So it was really interesting when I first joined S3. Within 4 weeks, we had our global leadership event. And you know what? I wasn't ever going to be able to shape this event in any way. I'd only been there for 3-4 weeks. So I decided to be a PA. So I joined the PAs and I said to the PAs, right, what do you need me to do? I will roll up my sleeves. I will help organize flights. I will do absolutely anything you need me to do to make sure this event is a success. In my mind, I'm thinking it will also give me FaceTime with these people and actually show them who I am. I'm able to then get to know them on a very different basis. It's not in an office, it's at an event. These people are running around. Trust is built in very, very different ways. And I did that. And I was on the floor putting up posters. I was cutting things out. I was doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't normally find a comms director doing. I wasn't looking at the scripts. I wasn't looking at the presentations. I was doing everything else. But what that did do was start to bridge the gap between me, the newbie, and the execs. Suddenly they saw me as this person who was really willing to roll up her sleeves and get the job done. I also spent a lot of time with them in that event. So it was a really good coup of mine. I wouldn't have been invited anyway if I hadn't done that. So I managed to spend a lot of time off screen with them as well, whether that was in the evening when we were having drinks or going to get a Burger King at the end of a very, very long day together and having a laugh, in the center of London. And that really did help. So I think looking for those opportunities is really, really important. It doesn't just have to be about comms opportunities. It can be any opportunity to get a little bit closer. And then I think the next thing that I've done, and I think this is where the relationships really start to build, is where you add value. How can you add value quite quickly? There's that horrible saying, low hanging fruit, but it is a thing. What's top of their mind? And what actually can you do to support them? And I think that's really important as well, so prove your worth.
Did you find certain leaders more receptive than others?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's always going to happen, isn't it? That's just human nature.
It's normal. We shouldn't take that to heart. There are certain natural fits with comms, if you can, you can put it that way but there are certain slightly less unnatural fits, IT perhaps, other such like functions. But again, it's about really understanding their world. And that's what I tried to do. And so far it's going well. Yeah.
I think your point about getting to know executive assistants is
Oh, that's
Absolutely
a winner.
huge. It's
Yeah.
huge. And
Yeah.
it depends on the organization. Organizations might have chief of staff. They might, so people kind of gravitate and go, oh, I'm going to go and schmooze with the chief of staff. It's like, you need to schmooze with everybody. You need to get to know everybody. And they need to trust you as much as you trust them. As you
Yeah.
say, it's about, who is this person? Oh, no, I've met her. She's great. This is what she wants to do. Or one of the key things I remember I did with one of my first CEOs was, I realised I needed time with him. I realised he had very little time. I asked for 15 minutes. His EA said, yeah, all right, because 15 minutes, that's fine. I can squeeze you in between other stuff. But at 15 minutes, I'm coming in and I will drag you out by the hair if I have to. So I knew I did the 15 minutes. And by 12 minutes, I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I'm out of here. And from that moment, she trusted me. Because everybody else would ask for 15 minutes and try and take an hour. And I asked for 15 minutes and took less. And so I got the time I needed because she realised I wasn't trying to pull the wool over her eyes or strong arm her into something, or, oh, there's no way she'll come in and drag me out by the scruff of the neck. Don't you know who I am? I'm the global head of Grand Fromages. Doesn't matter. She would go in and she would take them out. And so I noticed from that moment on, if I asked for 15 minutes, I got it.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful.
And it's exactly that. Being, literally throwing my hat into the ring for that event. I mean, that was the absolute winner, because suddenly they realised that, I was just like them, just because I had a title. And, I was more than willing to support them, to help them to make this event a success. And it really has helped me.
It's a bold move. I mean, it's also a risky move. I mean, if you screw something up at a management conference, everybody in the organization knows.
But then that's when Mike, that resilience piece comes in, and you put your hands up and you go, you know what, I'm human too. Can you help me? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we need to move away from this, this perfection veneer that sometimes we feel we need to have. I think, when it comes to strength, going back to the original question, and resilience, perhaps the most empowering thing you can do for yourself is to realize you are also human, and people will expect you to be human as well. And there is nothing wrong with that.
I think that's incredibly powerful, isn't it? It's almost, if you're in that first moment and you realize this ship has already sailed, like, this is going, I can't shape it, I can't do anything, but what I can do is learn about it and figure out how else I can use this as a relationship builder.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of stuff around relationships where we sort of, how can we gain trust with leaders? And people assume that can happen overnight. And actually, it's about building trust little by little. It's about having conversations, about asking great questions, about, as you say, being in the room and making sure that people, you're visible, but that you have a point of view, you have an opinion, you're not sort of a wallflower, you're there, and you're also there to learn and to help.
That's
I think
right.
coming back to that piece around, getting access to documentation, getting access to strategy. You said you'd done some funny things. I want to just dig into that seam and mine a little bit more around. I mean, I've done things where I've had to literally say to people, I don't want your job. I don't have skin in the game of your job. Don't worry. But I do need this in order to be able to do my job. And you can give me as little or as much as you like, but I do need this, and I will be persistent, and I will be tenacious, and I will keep coming back. And then I will show you and work out loud so you can see I'm not stealing anything, and I'm not trying to do what you're doing. I'm doing something completely different, but it needs your information. What have you done? Come on.
Oh, I've
Spill.
hounded. I've seriously hounded. I've camped outside people's offices, literally with my laptop. I have bought lots of coffees. I have, I wouldn't say stalked, but, I have followed people as they're coming in between meetings to get 5 seconds to ask again for that information. I've also presented the problem to people, which I think is the one that has made the most. I've got more results with that one than stalking or anything else, I'll be honest with you. But actually, when I say to people, okay, look, this is the problem I'm facing. This is the organization challenge. I can't resolve it without this in it.
Mm.
Help me.
Yeah.
Walk me through it. So they're not necessarily giving me the information, the file, which is what people are actually scared of doing. They're scared about giving you the actual file.
The document, or that
Yeah,
they
it's
lose.
the document. Exactly. And so when you start to say to them, I actually just need you to walk me through this, you're a clever person. You can look at it. You can, as they're talking, you can see the data, and then you can start asking more questions. As long as you've got that door open and that meeting is taking place, whatever that is, whether it's over a coffee in my case, or actually walking through, I've done that a lot in an elevator. You can start to understand where the links are, where that data sits, what you can take from it. Actually, does this really align to what the CEO or the CCO or whoever it is has been talking to you about? Or is there something else here that you need to look into more deeply, and where can you get that information? And I think that's the thing. It's about opening the door.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to escalate?
Oh, no.
Really? Interesting.
No, I'm the same, Shan. I wouldn't escalate. It's about building that relationship with that person, because if you use the hierarchy way, it kind of loses respect, and they're like, oh,
yeah, and it's not my way either.
Yeah.
I don't escalate. It's rare. I escalate when there is real need to escalate. So if I can see there is a car crash ahead, and I have raised it, and and actually it's falling on deaf ears, I will escalate. And it's at that point. But if it's something like this, no, if someone is unwilling to give you the information, it's either because they're worried for a reason. What is that worry for? Or they've been told not to share it. And then why is that? And I think unpacking that and building the trust first is perhaps the better way.
Yeah.
No, I raise the issue because there's a lot of comms people who are fairly new to the idea of collecting data that proves their value.
Yeah.
And I was involved with a project fairly recently where there was executive sponsorship for integrating a fair number of data, and then the people with the data would find various reasons not to supply it. And it was like a critical project. So it's like, this is a real problem for people. And I mean, this could be the barrier that keeps them from being able to demonstrate their relationship with stuff happening in the organization. So I was curious about, how do you deal with genuine roadblocks rather than with, creating a sustainable long-term relationship.
I think with something like that, and this is what I've done before. If you're working on a project and you're leading with that project, how are you reporting on what's happening? And if you have an executive sponsor and that is ultimately the CEO, and you realize you've got blocks, instead of going and feeling like you're telling tales out of school, or starts to feel a little bit sort of childish, there are ways of being able to say, okay, we've got a red, amber, green, we've got a RAG report that is going to give you, here's what's going on. It's very factual. It's very precise. And so they can see if something is continually blocked at red. Requested, not received. Done. And you try to go with the relationship piece. But if somebody just simply doesn't want to do that, what are you doing in order to be able to report up to your sponsors? And it's take the emotion out of it, so that you don't get into this sort of he said, she said weirdness that could get a little bit complicated, and politically tricky. And then politics comes into it, and nobody needs that in their life. If you can do something like that, then whoever is the sponsor should realize that there may be things that they can do to assist you getting access to whatever it is that you need to get access to. So it's about looking at multiple different ways, but that's not always the way that I would do it. But I have done that in certain projects when certain things have happened. It completely depends. It depends on the relationships you have. It depends on who that sponsor is, your relationship with that sponsor. There's so much behind that sort of terminology of relationship management.
And also we see it in a lot of things, not just with gathering data. It's the same. I think it's the same thing with most parts of our roles in comms. just to get the right information at the right time, understanding from your stakeholders what it is actually we are meant to be communicating here, and what is it you want to achieve as a result. Even sometimes having those conversations can fall into this same trap. So actually, it's a skill set that we should be. For me, it's a bit of a basic. We should be applying this all the way through. It should be part of your approach. Um, and when you do end up in that situation, like I say, I think escalating should be the last resort. But I really like, Janet, the way you put across, having a level of a red, amber, green, having a racy perhaps as well to support all the steps in the program that you are developing. There's lots and lots of things that you can bring to the table from that regard. But I do think it's part of our basic skill set as comms people.
So essentially, what you're saying that if you do need to escalate, you need to depersonalize the escalation to the maximum extent possible as well. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, 100%. I'm reading, I can't even remember the name of the book now. It's a silly thing to say, but I'm reading a book and it's all about that. It's about your thought process, and it's about actually the decisions that we make every day. How much of that is based on fact and versus based on your emotions? Um, and so if we want to get what we need, sometimes it is, well, I would say all the time, it's better to go in with the facts. If you take away the emotions, you're less likely to get an emotional response back. Also, you're going to be viewed in a very different way. It isn't this, as Janet said, telltale thing anymore. It's actually, this is why we need it. This is the impact it's going to have. And if we don't have it, this is going to be the situation. It's very, very factual.
I think it's really interesting as well. Sometimes and I've had this where sometimes somebody hasn't understood what my job is. So I've asked for the strategy. Surprise! So they've assumed that the internal communications person is there to chuck out a newsletter and do fluffy stuff. And when I've asked for what is the business strategy for next year, what is the business strategy for the next 3 years, so we can understand what the strategy is, how we can align some of the things that we're doing with that strategy. How can we identify the things where we could really make a difference? How can we identify the moments during the year based on the strategy so that we can pull together a plan that makes sense? And they sort of, when you slowly start to take them through that, I had a light bulb moment because they were, no, you don't need the strategy. I'm like, what part of my job have you not understood? And I didn't say that because obviously that would be incredibly rude. But that light bulb went in. I was like, oh, you don't understand what it is we could do here. You don't understand the power that we could unlock and how I can help you achieve your objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I need to roll it back even further and actually start doing some real basic 101 of, let me show you what I'm doing. And it was almost show and tell. I'll show you my strategy. Here's how it works. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. Here's how you can help me achieve that, and I can help you. So here's the mutually beneficial piece. And I think it sometimes can be really, if we go in assuming that people understand what it is we do, sometimes we could be in for a real shock. And there's some real basic education stuff.
Yeah.
That can really help influence.
Absolutely. And I'm one of those people that in my decks, every deck, if I have to produce a deck, or in every conversation, I have a slide that says, this is what internal comms is here to do. It's at the start of everything, regardless of how many times I've spoken to them. Even if we don't touch it, it's always at the beginning of that conversation. What are we here to do? It's part of my agenda and everything. Because you can say it until you're blue in the face in many organizations and circumstances. It takes a while for people to really understand we're not a post box.
It's like the safety moment before everything you do, basically.
Pretty much, yes.
I quite like that idea of it being almost, it's almost like the safety sort of thing that you would have on an airplane. You know, welcome to flight, Janet. Here's how it's going to work. Here's what we do. Yeah. And it's that, because as you say, you can tell people, well, are they listening or are they doing something else while they're at the beginning of the meeting? Whereas if it's there, written in the deck, presented in the deck, spoken about, it kind of comes back to that idea of you need to tell people things 7 times, but in very different ways before they go, oh, that's what this is about.
Yeah. And then just pull on the strands. You just pull on the strand that you're there to talk about today. So whether it be the overall strategy or whether or not it could be about the metrics and the
point
data.
number 7
you
and
can pull
100
on whatever
point
the strand is. You
one
just
day,
point...
and then it's point number 4 and 70 point type the next. I love this.
Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love your support in helping us reach more listeners. The best way to do that is hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. It's completely free and means you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's content, we'd love you to take a second to leave us a rating or a review. Your support really makes a difference in helping others discover this podcast. Plus, it lets us know what resonates with you so we can keep bringing you more of what you care about. Thanks and take care from me, Janet in London, and Mike in Iceland. So this podcast is called Navigating Disruption, and we are looking at a potentially very disrupted landscape over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Assumption being this could be rife for mergers and acquisitions. You've been through mergers, big old mergers in previous roles. What is your advice to senior comms folk who've never been through a merger before?
My biggest advice is to expect the unexpected. You can have the most beautiful comms plan based on the best change plan and the best project plan, and everyone can be in line, and oh my God, plot twist. So you need to not just have a comms plan version A, you need to have a comms plan that covers the risks and then how they're going to be mitigated. I think that is my biggest learning. I think I've done four mergers.
Woo!
From small to huge last year. And I would say the biggest learning I took into that 4th one last year was the fact that one comms plan is not enough. It really isn't. The plot twists happen everywhere. And you know what? Identify those plot twists. Identify very early on in those conversations. Have open conversations. And it could be with anyone. You know, a merger means so many different things are going to change.
Yeah.
It is one big change project. So put your change head on. That's what it's about. The word merger can scare people. Don't let it scare you. It is change.
Yeah.
Is it one big change project, or is it 100 big change projects?
Yes, it is. Mike's right. It is lots and lots and lots of different bits of change, but it is rolled under one big change. And you need to slice and dice it up. But like I say at the beginning, the most important thing is to plan for the things that are going to go wrong and make sure that you've had those conversations and that you have it noted down, because when it does happen, and it's going to happen, it always happens, you are in a place of calm and your stakeholders are in a place of calm, and you can just continue. You're not, you know, there's none of this chaos that does occur. So that would be my biggest advice.
Are there things that go wrong consistently based on your experience?
Yes, IT. I do like IT, by the way. Please don't. And if anyone's watching this from the IT industry, don't think I've mentioned them twice now. But IT does go wrong quite a lot just because of all the dependencies around it. So, for example, when you're merging 2 organizations or maybe 3, you know, at some point, this IT piece has to come together. So this might not be in the lead up to the announcement or anything else. It will be in the aftermath. And that is a really technical piece, and it depends on so much. So you need to make sure that you understand every single dependency on the outcome. Not just what does the outcome look like, but what are all those different dependencies, and then analyze the risk against them. You've got to remember, I think, and I do believe, comms is very much about risk management, as well as reputation management, as well as the job that we have to keep our audience hats on and to be the ear for our audiences and vice versa, be that, you know, really, really stand for them. But risk is key. really understand it.
What do you think is the biggest risk from a narrative perspective?
Huh. Right. Okay. So,
Welcome to the enormous question by Mike.
yeah,
Yes.
that's a huge one, Mike. I could shift that
I
back
have
on
an
you.
answer. That's why I have my own answer. That's why I asked the question. You work for a law firm, so naturally, if you're a lawyer, you don't ask a question that you don't have an answer to.
That's a very good point. What is the risk to the narrative? Narrative moves all the time. So a merger is not a straight line. It would be amazing if you announce the intention of merging and then 90 days later or whatever it is, you merge. The story behind the merger, I believe, should remain the same. But how you get there and what this is going to mean will uncover and move as you go ahead, because there will be certain things that the people in the room, the important people in the room, these execs from two organizations, their advisors, the finance companies who are helping them through, will chuck things out of the bath because guess what? We can't do that anymore. It's too expensive. Or guess what? We need to bring this in because your organization isn't shored up for this. So the narrative is going to constantly change and move, and you need to be nimble enough. Like I say, your plan will never be the same. You'll start off with this beautiful thing, and the end piece will look very, very different, and you just need to be prepared for that.
Have you had any experience of organizations overpromising at the outset of mergers?
Oh, it depends what you mean by overpromising.
As
You know,
in, no one's going to get hurt, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be better, which is usually the Uber narrative of every merger that, um, certainly that every merger that I've been involved with. And I just go, no, don't say that, please.
yeah. Yeah. Yes. But it's my job, I believe, as the person who would be leading on the internal comms, to make it very clear that that is a very bad idea and why. And so far I'm going to count myself lucky. I have been in a position where I've been able to sway, or I have had leaders who may have an idea of doing this, but then suddenly realize that this would impact investors or share price or whatever it is. So that, this is not a good idea. They're obviously thinking of the people last, but they're thinking of the money. So the narrative shifts quite quickly, but it is my role and our role to try to move the dial on that conversation and to be very, very clear why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not like you two with your 4 mergers. Excuse me. Feeling very inadequate. I've just got 1. But it was very interesting because it was done to French organizations, and the narrative in France was very different to the real lived experience in the UK entity. And so we didn't have access to be able to influence that narrative because that narrative was coming. I was at a section of that big organization, so I was part of that, but then I was a UK part of that, part of a French organization. So the narrative was being defined 2 levels above my CEO.
Wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't going to my CEO's boss, it was going to my CEO's boss's boss. So that was being managed at that point, and it did not ring true at all when it came to what we were experiencing in the UK.
Was it never tested, Janet? Because that really should be part of your comms process. When this narrative is being built, whoever it's being built by, it should really be tested. I mean, this is what we did. What we did from an internal and external narrative perspective. We were rigorous in this, and actually we kept on it because, like I say, it changes every day, and it's going to. That's the narrative. But did no one do that with you?
No.
Wow.
No. And what was interesting was at that point I was in an HR role. So I was I had a role which was more back before employee experience became a thing. I was essentially HR projects, and all HR projects were employee experience,
Yeah.
essentially. But it was called HR projects because nobody knew what to call it. And so I was leading on certain parts of this. And I remember asking because it became very political in the UK, and I asked specifically the head of HR, what was the communication plan internally for us to talk about this, or were we just going to take what was coming from France, which there was a disconnect. And I asked the head of HR, but I also asked the CEO. And the CEO came from the organisation which had been acquired, not the acquirer.
Right.
Whereas in France, the acquirers were setting the tone. And he believed, well, from a political perspective, he didn't like he wanted to call it a merger, but it was actually an acquisition. So it became very tricky. And it was only after, I think, 18 months, which is a long time, that we were able to start locally. And I was able to get traction because that CEO left and the CEO was brought in who was from the acquiring side, who I got on with quite well. And therefore we were able to start to shape what was happening. But for the longest period, I was stuck with a narrative that was coming from the mothership, shall we say, that wasn't landing well, that didn't have any authenticity because it was not people's lived experience, but a CEO who refused to acknowledge that as a narrative because he saw it as being a winners and losers, and he couldn't possibly be on the losing side. And it became incredibly difficult. So I 100% believe what you're saying. It changes all the time. It's constantly shifting. Yes, because I saw it happening, and we were like an untethered boat being battered about until we were able to start to tether ourselves to something that made more sense.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult.
And that I believe that will be most people's lived experience of mergers. Like I say, I don't know if I have been lucky or if I've been surrounded by great leadership teams, or actually if I've had the ability to really push things through the way they should be done rather than the way that people feel they should be done because of the high emotions at the time. Because let's face it, it is hard working through a merger, especially for those like the CEO who knows they're not going to have a job in the future. It's hard. But there are things that you can do as a comms person to make sure that the organizations, both or three or whatever, are not feeling that. Like I say, you can rigorously test, even if you're doing it on side without people knowing, is this going to work? Use your networks.
Yeah.
Do what you can to make sure that you are tethering the boat, so to speak, and people feel like this isn't being done to them. I think that's also really important.
Yeah. No, I think we've talked about it from sort of like quite almost not negative, but there's lots of negative connotations. But what were you most proud of through all of those mergers?
Yeah, so every single time it's that moment when you're on the day of the announcement and it's all done and it's 5 o'clock. And I often pull myself back and I'm watching people in the office and, they're toasting it or they're having cake or whatever. And I'm just watching the feeds and people talking about how excited they are, or they're on LinkedIn and they themselves are posting about it. Or that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, it's not that we've given you a post that you can post on LinkedIn. Please use these words, and everyone posts the same thing, and it's like, and there goes the authenticity. Bye bye.
Exactly. No, exactly. That's the thing. It is about that. That's what I'm proud of. It's been the volume of that. And also my team. I am so proud of the teams I've worked with through these 4 mergers. Whether that's a team that's directly reported to me or a project team or whatever, I am so proud because, like I say, Mergers are really, really hard. Going back to your original question, you asked me what comms people who have never been through this before should prepare for. The other thing I really do want to say is you have to protect your energy. You have to protect your heart, and you really have to protect your emotions, because this is going to be hard.
Yeah. It's interesting because I had a global head of HR when we did that, when the merger was announced, and she'd done many of these, and she looked at her team who had never done mergers but never been in a merger before, and she went, it's going to be rough. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be exhilarating, and all of you need to go through a merger. Everyone in their career needs to go through a merger and understand what it is, what it's about, what this means. And then she bought us all a copy of Who Moved the Cheese and said, go read that. It's going to be all about change. But then we all had a shared language to be able to talk about this thing that was coming on the horizon.
Yeah.
And we all had this sort of slightly sweet, whimsical book about mice and cheeses being moved. So, fair play to her. You talked there about being proud of your team. Bringing together this sort of pride, mergers, resilience, match fit. How do you get your team match fit for a merger?
How did I get my team match fit? Right, I was really honest with them. I was so honest with them. I said, you're going to cry. You're going to get really angry. You're going to tell me you don't want to work here anymore. It's going to be hard. That was the first thing, a little bit like your group head of HR. The other thing that I do with my teams, regardless of mergers or not, is I mentor them. I'm not a manager. I'm not someone that will sit on them and tell them what to do at any point. I mentor my teams. I coach my teams so that we prepare. I'm always in the mode of crisis in my brain. I need to make sure that my team will always be able to perform in a crisis. So I coach them regardless of where they are in their journey. The other thing I did and have always done with my teams is to bring in outside strength. Because you do need to look at your team. Can they do this? Right? It's really important. They could be the best people in the world, and most of the time they really are. But do they have the skill set that you need to get this thing off the ground, but also to see it through, not just to the day that you have announced the merger, but there is another 18, 24 months ahead of you. What skill set are you missing in that team? Shore it up. So that, I would say, is the biggest thing that I do. But then I make sure that my team understand why I'm doing that. That it's not about the fact that you haven't got this, it's a failure. It's actually, this is going to strengthen us. And I would say that's the biggest thing that I do. Get them ready. Bring the skills in.
It's an interesting segue into the question that I want to ask, which is really more about kind of the overarching, for lack of a better term, crisis that we face across the profession. To what extent do you think that the profession is prepared to navigate the coming disruption, and what advice, what support, what challenges would you want to share that could provide some value to people going forward over the next year?
I'm going to be really brutal. Okay?
Please. That's what we're here for.
I don't think we are. At all. We're still grappling with how do we use data, or we're grappling with no one's watching my videos, or we are not prepared. We need to take 30, 60 steps back, and we need to reconnect with what's going on in the world. We are so in our, we complain about silos, right? We are the team that complains about silos. What about our own silo? We're like this. We need to step out, and we need to learn not just from ourselves, but also from marketing. We need to learn from tech experts. We need to do more to really understand the skin in the game, so to speak, to prepare ourselves for what's coming ahead in the next few years. And we got to stop talking about comms trends. Okay. Comms trends are interesting. Yeah, great. Wow. But actually, what's going on in the world? That is what you really should be concerned about. And that is what is going to influence what you do on a day-to-day basis. So for me, I'm being pretty brutal, and I know I am, but that's what I really think we need to do, especially if you want to be taken notice of in a boardroom.
I mean, I don't think you're being brutal at all. I think there is a lack of honesty where there's a lot of navel gazing about what are the things. And I remember when I left the big corporate job, and I'd been in the big corporate job for 9 years, and I hadn't really been outside of it. And I walked outside, and I kind of went, "Okay, hello world, what have you got for me? What's going on in comms?" And it hadn't changed for 10 years. And I'm not hearing anything new or anything different or anything that links into what the World Economic Forum has told us are the risks coming in the next 2
Right.
years and the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm interested. I'm interested in what are those risks and how do we get ourselves match fit, to kind of continue that
right.
analogy, match fit for those risks. Not, do we need to move to the next latest and greatest technology, or does everybody need to use Viva Engage better? I literally just, it feels like a very insular and not very helpful conversation to help organizations, leaders, C-suites, people who we report to understand what we do and how that can support the wider organization, continuing the analogy, be match fit and achieve their objectives.
I don't think either of you are being brutal enough, actually. I mean,
Go on, sucker punch.
There is an underlying element of complacency around the importance of communication. Both that we have, that we think that we're intrinsically important and that it's a logical fit that people will continue to keep hiring us to do what we continue to do. And there's an organizational complacency, which is, if we just do this, we'll be fine. And so why do we need expensive, experienced people with lots of these, fancy old ideas and these dated skills? Why don't we just bring in 30-year-olds with Twitter accounts or with TikTok accounts? Do it for half the price and have it look nicer. I mean, there's this, the reality is that we are going into a three-dimensional shitstorm here. Between the Trump administration, climate change, the general state of the world, and the destabilization of employee confidence. You are dealing with all four of these things simultaneously, and we're worried about pets at work. Sorry, that was my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, and that's it. I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, but maybe in a slightly less brutal way. But what I do think, and this is where it becomes brutal. I don't think it's because we don't have the capability. I think it's because we are hiding. We are hiding behind the tactics. I am so done seeing LinkedIn posts about the bloody tactics. Okay, let's really talk about where we can make an impact. Let's really talk about what really is on our CEOs' minds right now. Not just our CEOs, but everyone's minds right now. And let's do something about that. We'd have the capability.
I applaud that. And I think there is a sense of staying small in some of the stuff that we're seeing. And actually, we shouldn't be staying small. Which is why I think, Shan, you do exactly the same. I know, Mike, you read an enormous amount. I read a stupid amount of books. And sometimes I get people pop into my DMs and say, but what you're reading isn't about internal comms. So we then have an unpack conversation. And I'm very happy to have that conversation. But it surprises me that conversation is necessary. And that people aren't linking the two things. If I want to read something about AI, I'm reading it so that I can understand, okay, how can I then apply that to my work? How can I understand what you're talking about and apply that to what I'm doing? Any of the books that I've read in the last couple of years have been, okay, that was really interesting. That was about, I don't know, systems thinking. Really interesting. It gets quite technical, and there were some points where I was like, hello, this is a bit much. It all feels a bit physics, and physics is absolutely not my forte. Dropped it before GCSE, people. It wasn't my thing.
GCSE are British tests, by the way, just so you know.
Exactly. I stopped studying that when I was 14 years old, and that might shock a lot of people, but what I was able to do was then understand this concept of systems thinking, which says, don't just think in this tiny, narrow little space. You actually need to look at the whole context of the thing to understand where are the levers that can support you, where are the levers that can help. So this concept of systems thinking allowed me to then say, here's how I can overlay that onto the way I think about communication, corporate communication, internal communication. So I think I want to see more of that kind of thinking. I want to see a wider, broader, how are we bringing things in that we can learn from and apply?
Yeah,
And
100%.
and not how to get 50,000, how to get more likes on your post. I
Yeah.
couldn't give a monkeys about likes. I really
No.
couldn't.
No, exactly. And you know what? We are always complaining. We're always complaining. And you know, Michael, I love the way you put this about having your hand on the steering wheel rather than having a seat at the board table. I think both of them, I'm going to be honest, I think both of them are as important. There are times when you need that seat at the table, but you also need your hand on the steering wheel. But we complain that we are not there, or that we were there during COVID, but we're not. We've gone backwards. Look at yourselves. Does your CEO really want to sit there and talk to you about internal comms, or does your CEO want to talk to you about the problem that he is facing from a macroeconomics, local economics perspective, and how you as a communications expert are going to help him? That's what he wants to talk about, or she.
Or they. Or
Or them.
them.
Yes.
Or the other side of it is that if you are secure enough in the knowledge that you have a hand on the wheel, then you can talk about the implications of that at the table.
Yes.
But you can't really have the seat at the table unless you've got the basis for sitting there. And we don't get that to the largest possible extent.
Does this then come back to, should we stop talking about ourselves as internal communicators? And should we start talking about, or internal communication professionals, however we want to phrase that? Should we start talking about ourselves as business problem solvers? Or is that too vague and wishy-washy?
So that, for me, that's a stretch too far. So if you think about a business problem, let's take a really, really obvious one, right? People are not engaged in your business strategy. You get that metric, from the engaged surveys that people like to fill in. I hate surveys. Well, look at that as a problem. There are so many factors leveling into that. If we call ourselves business problem solvers or anything, then we will be seen as the ones who are able to solve those problems, when actually there are so many levers. It's so multifaceted.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't think so, but I like where you're going.
Exactly. It's like, do we need to rebrand? Do we need to shift? And is there a because strategic communication can mean so many things, and strategic doesn't particularly mean anything. So
that's right.
As communication professionals, we're supposed to be pretty good with words. It feels like we need to, if we do want to look insular and at ourselves for one moment, maybe we can come up with how we need to talk about ourselves better. Yeah. And how we need to sell ourselves and what we do and the value that can bring to an organization better.
I agree. And at the same time, it's definitions are a two-way street. You take a term and you choose a set of words to define that term, and people either buy it or they don't. I mean, we could rebrand ourselves as Jaguar. But that's not necessarily going to produce
Let's
Let's not go there.
the desired result. No, that's exactly why I went there. Because, you know, there's, well, there's got to be some credibility behind the language that you choose.
yes. Yeah,
And I mean,
absolutely.
business problem solver isn't going to fix supply chain problems in China that are beyond, that have been
No.
subcontracted out. Unless you really want to be imperialistic about the way you engage your suppliers. But the definition of internal communication could be upgraded if we're going to back up that upgrade with action.
I've actually dropped the internal from how I present myself, because what I do isn't just internal. Let's face it, my audience might be internal, but actually my audience is also external, because they see things everywhere. I firmly believe that there needs to be more of this. Let's stop putting this line between internal, external, marketing, everything else. It's communication.
I get it, but I also get the risk involved in that.
Yeah, there is risk, but can't deny that is the way the world is moving, and whether we go with it or not go with it, it is going to happen. I am seeing it more and more, especially working for a recruitment organization, which is where I am at the moment. It's very, very interesting, the differences from what an internal channel is deemed to be from an audience perspective. Not from my perspective, from an audience perspective. LinkedIn for them is an internal channel.
Oh, for sure.
Which is fascinating, because I haven't come across that before. So this is really interesting to me. So it's about, I just think how we do things as internal communicators, it just needs to shift. But with that, as you say, Janet, definitely the job title, but also how we're perceived.
And also, I'd also argue how we attack the issue. I mean,
yeah, how we do, yeah.
Because the challenge that I find with integrating the terminology of internal communication into general communication is that it often invites external communication people to hijack the internal comms content without having any understanding of how employee dynamics drive communication outside the organization. So that's the key risk that I find. I mean, I'm fine with internal communication being seen as the key external communication driver. What I'm not fine with is PR people saying, okay, screw this, we're going to send press releases to employees. And I've seen that happen on more than a few occasions.
I think a lot of that can come back to where we originally started this conversation, which is about relationship management.
Yeah.
And I think when I was at the big fruit company,
and we're not talking Chiquita here.
No, and it wasn't BlackBerry. But when I was at the big fruit company, one of the key things that we got to, sort of probably about 4 or 5 years into sort of setting up the function and creating a more strategic function and not just sort of sending out ops comms. But we got into really good relationships with our Marcom team. And it was about and that came about because we came together with marketing. And marketing actually had a way of looking at what we were doing and not trying to say, oh, you need to just send. There was a little bit of, you just need to send some of this stuff out, until we sort of said, actually, this is how we're working. And we'd become quite sophisticated in the way that we were working at this point, but we also knew how we were doing what we were doing, why we were doing what we were doing. We had a very strategic planning function that was sort of set in place. And so we were able to talk them through, here's how we can help you amplify your campaign. Here's how we can, if you're pushing out something in a specific country, but it's not going anywhere else, here's how we can talk to the people in the stores in that region or country And here's how we can give them stories that they can share with customers. So here's how we can use a 60,000 strong workforce to actually bring to life some of the images that they might see, or some of the advertising that they might see, or some of the out of home that they might see. Here's how we can start to bring that to life by using those people, by bringing them in, by giving them some behind the scenes cool stuff. Here's the why behind it. Here's the person who came up with it. Here's an interview with the person that you would never get to talk to. We're going to bring them to you so they can talk about the amazing work that they've done. It's aspirational, it's inspirational, but you can then translate that to how does that enter a conversation about a product that person has come into the store to want to buy. And it was through those conversations and through those relationships that we built that we were able to do some of the stuff that I was most proud of. Because we were giving. It wasn't just, oh yeah, there's a new lot of advertising going up. What's it about? No one knows. What's the message behind it? No one knows, because nobody's talked to us because they're so revered and they're so, frankly, cool, seriously cool, that we can't get near them. But actually, if we start to work together, if we start to sort of chip away and build that relationship, and it took a good number of years. And there were a couple of times where they sort of said, oh yes, well we've put together our plan and we put in a tick box that we need to do something with you. And we were like, we can tick box it, but that doesn't really give us the opportunity to play. Give us time to play. We will bring to life some of your stuff in a way that is going to make you go, wow, okay, that's cool. We can try and bring the cool back to you. And so this just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by doing that, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, but it's relationships.
It is. I agree with you. That's exactly how it's been. So I haven't experienced what you're talking about, Mike, because I think it is about those relationships. And it at the law firm, you can imagine if we had started, if the first thing people heard was an external message versus internal, you could imagine what would happen there. And to get to that point, and I'm not saying it was right when I walked through the door. It really wasn't right when I walked through the door. And it took, before we even knew about the merger happening, we were having those conversations about why it's important. A bit like Janet said, for the first time someone hears of something has to be through the internal comms channels, talking in a way that is relevant to them, not a press release that's just been shoved internally. And it did take a few months, but the merger actually was the piece that cemented it, and everything was driven from the internal, which was fantastic. And then prior to that, it was exactly the same. So I actually don't. I think if everyone understands the lane in which they play, the value that they bring, and how working together you can add even more value, I don't see that as a risk, to be honest.
I think we're starting to come to. We've taken loads of your time, and so we're starting to come to the end of our conversation. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that you haven't had the opportunity, or as we've had our meandering conversation, is there anything you thought, oh, I wanted to come back to that, but I didn't get to it? And you can absolutely say, nope, I'm really happy with what we talked about.
I'm good.
Excellent.
Was it all right? Did you need anything else?
Fantastic. This has been fun. This has been epic.
Okay.
I think for someone who started by saying, I don't really like doing these, I don't really talk about them a lot, I think you've had you've brought some real wisdom.
Can I tell you why?
Go on.
Why? Because I've never educated the word in internal comms. I don't do theory. I read the books, absolutely 100%, but I don't do the theory. I don't apply theory. I don't talk in the way that so many people do who are seen to be experts. So that's why I don't like doing these, because it's my experience that's taught me. And actually having quite a few great people around me. Do you know what I mean, Mike? You're one of those people. So
Oh, thank you.
you know what I mean? But it's that. So that's why I don't like doing these, because I always think to myself, why the hell would you listen to me? You know, I don't have that.
That's precisely why we wanted to listen to you.
Well, thank you. You made me feel good.
I was going to say, that's exactly why you've been invited. I mean, someone who describes themselves as a communications warrior, I think it's such a bold statement, but it's a statement that you absolutely back up. And you absolutely know why you're using those words to describe yourself. And I think hopefully after this conversation, people will really realise what there is and what that brings, and that you can't. Yes, the books are great, but learning from lots of different places, and I think people learning from you as you've learned from others, I think is a great place to leave this this podcast. Shan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your days.
So, Shan, what did you think?
Well, I love the fact that we got into a number of my favorite subjects: mergers, confidence, and the need for a brutal self-assessment among people in our profession about where we're at and where we're going. And Shan really said a lot of things that people need to be saying about how we need to reflect and regroup very quickly at this point in time.
I have huge amounts of respect for Shan, and I think that one of the things that I as I said at the end of the podcast, the fact that she describes herself as a communications warrior, and I remember seeing that and thinking, what does that mean? And then talking with her, and I met with her at an IABC conference, and thinking, oh, I completely get this. I absolutely understand. You know exactly where you're coming from. You know, and she's had some knocks, but she's used those to drive this force that is, she knows exactly who she is. She knows exactly where she's coming from. She's so grounded in her thoughts and the way she does things, and with a healthy dollop of humility. But she's had some incredible experiences that have taught her a huge amount, and each time she's had an experience, she's learned from it. And I think I have enormous amounts of respect for that, and from the thoughtfulness that she comes to the conversation with. She's not looking for sound bites. She's not looking for the latest trend. She's looking for what is actually going to make a difference. And I think that is, for that, I applaud her.
Yeah, I mean, we need a lot more of that in this space.
Yes.
On that,
you were going to say on
continue.
that note, and I was going to say something else, but no, you can say on that note.
something else. No. You always add value.
I was going to say, I hope that she gains a lot more confidence from this to speak a lot more in this space. I would love to see her doing some speaking gigs at some of the conferences, or being a panelist at some of the conferences. I think she brings huge amounts of value to what she says. It's smart, and I hope that a lot of people who are listening to this will either search her out, seek her out, definitely start following her, and seeing what she can bring to the party, because I think she's got a lot of value to add.
Shan Chatoo is definitely somebody that we should be hearing more from in the near future.
Definitely.
And then on that note, thank you very much for yet another outstanding Navigating Disruptions conversation.
Thanks, Mike.